Welcome back. Now that we've finished the first assignment, let's do a review and do a short project based on the things that we learned in the first assignment, okay? I'm going to open up my terminal here. Actually, I'm going to just make a whole new terminal there. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a project using props and state. And the project will look something like this. So here I kind of have the finished product there, and you can see I have a series of counters. So this is counter 0, counter 1, and that's the value of the counter, and counter 2. And this is the total of all the counters. So if I click the plus button, this number goes up for that counter, and the total increases. And if I hit the minus button, then the counter will decrease, and the total will also decrease, right? So each counter has its own buttons to increment that particular counter, right? So each of these counters counts separately, and then we have the total here, okay? So we'll use props and state here, and we'll talk about lifting state again and review that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a brand new React project. So we'll review that also, right? I'm going to go to this folder that I have over here. Let's call it, let's go to this class 2 folder here. And then I'm going to make a brand new React project with npx create React app. And then I'll follow it with the name. Let's call it props state review, okay? And then this will take a moment while it creates that project. And I actually have the sample project here is this props and state file, right? So the new one that I'm going to create will be in this folder right here, okay? So there, it's still going. Maybe I'll even open this up right here. I'll just drag it on top of VS Code there, and then this will be where we work. Okay, so we're making some progress there. Almost done. Any moment now. Almost, just waiting. Almost there. And let's see. Oh, there we go. It's all done. So then the next step is let's launch our project, right? So I'm going to run yarn start. Oops, wait, I got to navigate to that folder first. So let's do cd props state review, and then let's do yarn start. Okay, it looks like I have another project running on another port, so it's going to offer me, instead of port 3000, it'll give me another port. So I'll just hit return, and it'll put this on a different port. There we go. So then it's launching our project. And while it's doing that, I'm going to go to the source directory, and you can see I've got the app component here, right? Let me zoom in on that. Okay, so I hope you can all see this and be able to read this, right? Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do is I think I'm going to just delete all the stuff in app here, right? So I'll leave this outer div there, but I'll delete everything else on the inside, okay? And since we're not using this logo right here, we can delete that. That's that picture of, the image that was kind of spinning over there. Okay, and the next step, so now we have an empty app, but it's working, right? But it's not displaying anything. So the next step is to create a new component. Okay, so let's make a brand new file, and we'll save it, and I'm going to call this counter.js. Okay, and I'll put it in the source directory, so all of our code goes in source. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a function called counter, and this function will receive props, okay? Because, if you recall, I have 3 counters here. I could have as many counters as I want, each counter is going to display something different, but the counter itself is the same code, right? We use the same code to generate each counter. It would not be very efficient if we had to write a new component for every single, every single counter that we created, right? So we're going to make one of these, and we're going to use props to configure it. So props will allow us to set the label, and it will allow us to set the value. Okay, so next, let's say return, and then I'll wrap this in a div. Maybe we'll give it a class name of counter, and then let's make sure we export counter as the default export. Okay, and now inside our counter, let's set up a label, the count, and two buttons, a plus and a minus button, right? So in the last one, I used a small tag, but that was actually pretty small. I'm going to use a paragraph this time, and I'll put the label here, right? And what I want to do is I want to configure the label through props. So I'm going to say props.label. And then over here, I'm going to make an H1 to hold the count. And I'll do props.value. Okay? So props.value will be there. And then I'll make two buttons. So I'm going to do a button. And this button will be the plus button, and then this button will be the minus button. Okay, and then I don't see anything yet because we haven't used the counter. So I'm going to go to app here, and I'll import our counter. So I'm going to import the counter from /counter, and then over here I'll use the counter. So here is where we configure the counter and we assign values to props. So it's hard to see here, but I have the two buttons appear there, right? And since I haven't set anything for the label and the value, like nothing shows up here, right? So let's set the label, and we'll set this to, I'm just going to use a string, right? So I can just say apples, and the value will be, let's see here, let's make the value 3, okay? So now it says apples is the label, value is 3. And if I want to make another counter, then, I can just copy this first one, set the label to oranges, and the count to 7. And now I have a second counter, everything from here to here. It's got a label, it's got a count, and then it has the two buttons, okay? So that gets us started there. Oops, that gets us started. So now how are we going to actually make these buttons work to where they increase or decrease the count? Okay, let's do that. So I'll go to counter here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to import use state from React. So I'm going to import from React, and I'm going to import use state. Okay, so this is a special function that lets us create a state variable and a setter function for that variable. Okay, this is called a hook, right? They call these hooks. Hooks can only be used inside function components, right? So we can make components also out of a class. The use state only works, or all of the hooks only work inside a function-based component, or a component built from a function. And you have to call them at the top of your function. Okay, so I'll have to use it here. I can't use it inside the return statement, okay, or somewhere else. You can't put it in an if block or some other code here, okay? It has to be at the top of the function and not anywhere else, right? Or not nested inside some other construct like a if or a for loop or something, if block, okay? So anyway, so let's set this up. So I'm going to say const square brackets, and then I'm going to put, let's say, value here, and set value, okay? And then I'll call use state, And what we're going to put inside useState is the default initial value for value. Maybe I should change that to count and set count. This is make it a little easier to talk about, right? So set state, inside the parentheses, we're going to put the initial value for the count. So I'm going to use a different number here. Let's use 6 for this, right? And then what I'm going to do is over here, instead of props.value, I'm going to replace that with count. Okay, so now you can see both of these are 6 because they both come from the same component and they both get the same initial value. Okay, so next, what I want to do is I want to be able to change the count. And in order to change this variable, we're going to always do it through calling the setter function, right? So for the button right here, I'm going to add an on click, and we'll put a function in here, right? I'll just type the whole thing for now. Okay, so I got my whole function here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call set count, and then I'll give it the new value for count. So what I want to do is I want to change count from its previous value to the new value will be the count plus 1. So when I call set count and I pass in, or I give it an argument of count plus 1, then it'll take 6, add 1, it'll be 7. And this component will refresh, it'll draw itself, we'll see the new value for count, and the new value for count will be 7. And then the second time we click the button, it'll add 1 to 7, and we'll get 8. It'll refresh the component, we'll see the 8 here. Okay, let's try it. So if I click on this button, you can see I get 7 and I get 8, right? Notice that doesn't change this one, right? So state is a value that's held internally by every component, and it's unique for that component. So apples, or this first counter, can have a different value for its count state, and the second counter can have a different value for the count state. Okay, so that gets us started on this project. We're going to do a little more with it, but my challenge for you now is to have you add a decrement function to the minus button. So the decrement button should subtract 1 from count and then update the component. So give that a try, and then we'll continue in the next video. And again, thanks for watching.